Welcome to Old Path and our study through the book of Proverbs, which we complete today. Our Monday studies through the Old Testament. And so next week we will begin the book of Ecclesiastes and moving our way through the Old Testament. Now, before we get to the text, there'll be some observations that I think are really helpful for us. And it is a very unusual proverb, and many of you probably even recognize it. It's the Proverbs 31 woman, but there are some other things about it that are pretty interesting. So we'll get to that in just a moment. And as we conclude and finish up the study today, I want to address something that gets brought up from time to time, and especially it kind of goes along with some of the things I've said about conspiracies and our study of the end times. And that really becomes when Christians begin to speak using terms that really are not, they're certainly not understood very well as far as the world is concerned. And if the world that is unbelieving hears it, sometimes they hear the phrases and everything else, but we can just by the words that we use or the way that we describe something can just completely confuse the people that we're trying to talk to. So trying to avoid slogans and all that kind of stuff, and really being able to articulate things in just common language is going to be much more beneficial to us. So I kind of want to look at that, especially when we talk about things of the end times or eschatology and those kinds of words that are very much the inner circle part of Christianity. But even a lot of Christians get kind of, glassy-eyed when you start to talk in these kind of terms because they're not familiar with them. So I want to address that. And how do we make it where we can discuss things that need to be discussed without making it seem like we're kind of cut off from the day-to-day of just normal discussion? So I want to kind of go through that. I think it's just important for us in how it is that we talk about the matters of our belief and our faith. So we'll get to that here in just a little bit. Of course, I want to make mention that we are still planning our trip to Israel. Everything looks very favorable for our trip there. Interesting things taking place in the world scene or on the world scene when it comes to the Middle East and things like that. And some things are being reported in the news that may or may not be factually based. So there's a lot of, I think, weird information that's making its way around. So we'll see where it all shakes out. But we don't think that it's going to create any kind of problem or strife as far as our trip is concerned. I would encourage all of us to be praying for Israel and for its leaders, certainly for our leaders here. I am absolutely convinced that if our country does things treacherous to Israel, then that is something that God takes great offense towards. And nations of the world that have done it the most flagrantly and repeatedly have suffered the consequences of it. And I wouldn't want to be on the wrong side of that. So if you have questions about that, and if that's something that you've not really heard addressed, I would love to be able to go through that with you. And you can contact me through the ministry's website, which is oldpaththeology.net. And you can contact me there for any reason, from the things of the actual trip itself, if you want details about it, or any input on the program and the things that we go over here. If you're new, this may be the first time that you've looked through the studies that we do here. We go all the way through the text. So on Thursdays, we're getting to the latter chapters in the book of Revelation, and then we will start at the Gospels. So we're always working on that cycle through the Old Testament on Mondays and the New Testament on Thursdays, and we would love to have you join us for all of them. Studying all the way through every book, chapter, and verse, I think is a very, very important way for us to have a very balanced approach in our belief. So with all of that, let's turn to the book of Proverbs. And Proverbs 31 is where we're going to be. And I'll hold off really quick on one part of the proverb that is put here, but I think it's helpful for us when we look at Proverbs 31. This is kind of the situation that most people are familiar with, the perfect woman, if you will. And that's really not even found until verse 10 is where that all starts through. There's a very interesting grammatical kind of a thing in this, in that it has a similar kind of a situation as we find in Psalm 119, where each verse begins with the letter of the alphabet starting from the beginning to the end. So if you're looking at it and reading it in Hebrew, you would notice that the very first letter of the first word, or the first word is something taken from that letter of the alphabet. So interesting in that construction of it, though the first 9 verses are something that is completely different. One other thing about this, and I know that it becomes, with great intention. Ladies would look at this and they hear other women teach on it, and the Proverbs 31 woman is something that seems completely unobtainable. And so it's like, if this person actually existed, you would probably just want to, tell them to calm down, because you're really ruining it for the rest of us. Let's remember that these would be the same characteristics, though, genders and things like that. There are things that were acceptable, especially at this time. There were things that women had roles to do and men had roles to do as well. But when you come to the matters of character behind them, they take on a completely different look. So what you see here is the ideal person, as far as a woman, or as far as, even if you tried to do the straight across, what could we see as far as a man is concerned? And rather than the actions, you would want to look at the matters of the character. So the actions are always going to follow the character of the person. So this really speaks more to the character of the individual. And remember, this is being written still from the idea of, if a young man is going to seek out such a person as a wife, then what kind of character would you want to see her, and how would she exemplify that? And you would see it in her actions. So as far as men are concerned, this would be the same thing. Ladies, if you're looking for a husband or a man, you would want to find that he is a person of impeccable character, and you'll know that character by his actions. So I just wrote down these characteristics. These are just my thoughts as I look through this, and there were so many of them, I just wrote them down because I wouldn't want to try to remember this and recite it just from memory. There's a whole list of them, but if I put it like this, if they are, you could say, if this person is currently this way right now, they will be that way down the road. But these are just the things that I looked at. They would be strong character, industrious, wise, shrewd in the good way. Shrewd, that they look at something and they make a wise decision financially and for the long term. So shrewd, driven, trustworthy, just, compassionate, because they concern themselves with things of the poor, as we'll see. They're successful, they're prosperous, they're skilled, they're prepared. They see the big picture and they make preparation for things down the road. Just kind of a number of different things. If you look at each one of the verse, you could say, yeah, well, that's because the person is worthy of trust. That's because they're industrious. That's because they're driven. That's because they're these things. So ultimately, the last few verses becomes really what could be said of a person like this. The rest of what you see here is more looking at the way that that person would conduct themselves. This is the ideal human, that if a young man was to look for a wife, this is what he would do. Now, we see that this is addressed to a king, and there are some people that see a few things, which I'll get into here in a moment, but even the first 9 verses being separate from the rest of the 10 verses, as though it may have been written at a different time and then kind of put together. And once again, all of the arguments that you might see that people have about who is really the intended recipient of this, and who is the mother, who is the son, and all that stuff, you'll find that there is a lot of disagreement on it. And this is one of those places where it's fun to play it through those things and try to figure it all out. But sometimes you can be so locked in the pursuit of trying to figure those kinds of questions out that you miss the big picture of what was being said here and why does it matter to me. That's the stuff that we would be smart to pay attention to. And that's how we're going to look at it here as we go through this particular text. So I don't have to concern myself if I know what is meant by Lemuel and who is the mom and all the rest of that stuff. The things that she gives is very practical, and it really is directed at the king. Here's how a king ought to conduct themselves, and here's what could be said of them. Now, king, as you look for a wife. So we will notice also, and something that, if you read commentaries and stuff like that, I didn't see anybody really in the things that I had read make much of a notice of this, but many of these things, when we think of kings, think like Solomon and think people like him. Most of the time, the people who do the things that are said that this woman does are really things left for other people. A queen is going to be doing much different things. She's not going to be overseeing the household necessarily. And if this is from the mother speaking to the son, if he's the king, he's not looking for a wife who does all this stuff. She is having people who serve under her do much of this. And some of the stuff that's in the normal day-to-day commerce of things is really outside of the purview of somebody that's in royalty. Doesn't mean that she couldn't have necessarily all of these characteristics, but it might not be her everyday kind of a thing. She's not going to be, if you will, the laborer in this. And when you read what it says about this woman, this ideal woman, she's very much in the day-to-day labor of maintaining a household and doing all those kind of things. So once again, that's how it helps us to understand this is speaking in the ideal sense. So a queen, if she didn't do all these things, could still have the same exact character that if she was in the position where she had to do such things, she would do them flawlessly in the same way. So again, ladies, if you're reading this and you're following along with me in this, and you happen to be in that place where you're not married, but you're looking for a husband, you would say the same things of him. So would he be found as the person who is this incredibly diligent person who's so driven and trustworthy, and that they're moral and wise and all the things that she is? And so much so that the people around them have nothing but accolades to say about them. That what they see in the outward is exactly what goes on in the inward. So what we're looking at again is the ideal. And it starts at verse 10. So we'll look through those. But for the first 9 verses, this is really a mother's cry to a son. And again, since she's mentioning as far as a king is concerned, that kind of helps us understand a bit about who this is. So we'll take a look at that. Let's have a word of prayer, and we'll take a look at our text. Father, we thank you once again that we can come to you and we can seek you out through your word. And when we do so, and reading things like Proverbs from such a long time ago to people who are under the law, and how could it have relevance to us, people who live in the New Testament sense of the church? And yet we can read from these things, this is timeless. And the application directly to us is one of character and the importance of those things. So may we learn from you, and we pray that you would use this time and that you would bless it, that we would be useful to you and all that you do. And so we give you all thanks and pray that you'd open our eyes to this understanding, and we ask it in Jesus' name. All right, so what you find this is addressed to, you'll see in verse 1, it says, the words of King Lemuel, the utterances which his mother gave to him. And so Lemuel, if you look through the list of the kings, there is no King Lemuel. But what you'll find is what the name means. And so there are people that would look at this King Lemuel. When you see the word Lemuel, it's for God or belonging to God. There's a couple of different ways that it can be translated. So is it really that that's his proper name, or is that just more that is an identification for who he is? And that's why it has led most to conclude that this Lemuel is just actually another way of saying Solomon by looking at a title that could be given to him rather than by his given first name, which in that case would mean that this is Bathsheba that would be writing this first part to him, and the advice that she would be giving to him, including what you would see starting from verse 10 all the way down. So if we didn't know any of that, and let's just say that this was to King Solomon and that is who is identified, it wouldn't change a thing. This would still be his mother. It could be King Josiah for that matter. It would still be his mom saying what is really wise to him and what he should be looking for in a wife as he grows older. So it's why sometimes looking into the little minutia of things can sometimes almost begin to cloud what really should be the takeaway, if you will, from what we're reading, and why is it important that we understand, and why should we focus in on such things. So I want to try to eliminate as much after the first part of this and not be concerned so much with who Lemuel is and who's his mother and all that stuff. That's all just kind of interesting, and you can find plenty of it online. People will do a very competent description of it, and you can see where the different views line up. Without all of that information and without all of that, it doesn't change a thing about what is said in the moments hereafter. And it's really important. So let's remember what's written here is from the king's mother, and what she has to say about here's the conduct of the king and why it's important that you should be paying attention. And then going forward, as far as a wife for yourself, here's what you ought to look for. So in verses 1 through 9, we'll just read the whole thing. It says, "Now the kings of Lemuel, the utterances which his mother taught him, what, my son, and what son of my womb, and what son of my vows, do not give your strength to women, nor your ways to that which destroy kings. It is not for kings, O Lemuel, it is not for kings to drink wine, nor princes intoxicating drink, lest they drink and forget the law, and pervert justice to all afflicted. Give strong drink to him who is perishing, and wine to him who is bitter, or to those who are bitter of heart. Let them drink and forget his poverty, or let him drink and forget his poverty, and remember his misery no more. Open your mouth for the speechless, and in the cause of all who are appointed to die. Open your mouth, judge righteously, and plead the cause of the poor and the needy." So this would be a mother saying to a son, look, here's your potential things. You can do a couple of different things that will throw everything off, and you'll quit being the kind of king that should be good for the people. And the first two things that he mentions is if you're going to give yourself over to drinking and to putting yourself under that influence, or if you're going to put yourself under the influence and give your authority and pretty much everything, you're going to have someone else control you, in this case, this woman. Interestingly enough, when it mentions strength here, it really means that whole mind and body kind of a thing, that this woman that you would give yourself to will run control over your life and even change the course of what you might otherwise do. That's the caution at first. She begins this by saying, so what could I possibly tell you? You're my son, the son of my womb, the son of my vows. What could I possibly impart to you that would be helpful in verse 2? So then she starts to go through this. Don't give your strength to a woman, and don't let her be the one who sets your course. So who should be that person? Well, obviously that should be something that you give over to the Lord, and then you would be seeking him for the woman who would keep you from doing all those things. Now, the second part of those is don't come under the influence, not only just of a woman, but don't come under the influence of strong drink, because it will cloud your judgment. It will keep you from doing what a king ought to do righteously. And so these are just cautionary things. Now, interesting, when it comes to strength, that is going to be something in a very slightly different form, but it means the same thing that we're going to see a couple more times in actually verses 10 through 31. So the important part is he says, don't give your strength, and the word that he uses there, he's going to use two more times, and I'll point those out because they're pretty interesting. So let's look through the little bits and pieces of this. So don't give your strength, verse 3, to women, nor to the ways that destroy or lead to the ruin of kings. And so we can see this through history. The people who would not look to the Lord, but look to other things, and really to Solomon, if you think about it, in his time, he became under the influence of his wives. We get that from 1 Kings 11, where he fell under the influence of his wives, and they turned his heart from the Lord. So if this is really genuinely Solomon that's being spoken to here, and his mother gave him this advice, if you will, or this counsel, he didn't heed it, all of it, for the entirety of his life. Now, so sorry, we don't get a lot of information about him being somebody who was prone to drinking and all the rest, but we've seen plenty of it in the Proverbs about staying away from such things. Now, let me address one thing, because it always becomes a contentious thing. When it comes to the matters of drinking, you know, should a believer drink, and should a Christian, is there prohibitions on it and all the rest? Well, you'll find that there's plenty of times, both Old and New Testament, when they would, when people would be able to drink and take intoxicating drink. The question is always, when does it cross over from that to coming under the influence of it? So you will never find drunkenness ever spoken of in a way that is acceptable. In fact, that's always a sinful thing. So drunkenness is always a problem. Now, the way to avoid all that, if you can do so, and it's personally the way that I view it, for myself personally, since it's hard to tell where that line is and it's easy to step over, I don't ever want to get to the place of drunkenness or having myself and my faculties in any way kind of diminished. Other people disagree with that. So again, the Bible doesn't say that you can't drink. You're free to do what you want to, but drunkenness is never condoned. It's never acceptable. It is always spoken against. So if people want to try to find out where that line between the two is, it's not mentioned. One person's drunkenness is not another's. So this is not intended to just, kind of like set in stone something. This is obviously speaking about you're drinking to the point where it alters you. And so you'll see that in the words that she speaks. So right here, it starts at verse 4. It is not for kings, O Lemuel, it is not for kings to drink wine, nor for princes intoxicating drink. And though it seems like it's straightforward, the obvious part of it is to the point of impairment. Because obviously all of them would have drank things that could have led to intoxication all through the ages. So there is the implied difference between those two things. Now again, for myself personally, I don't wine, anything else. I don't take those types of things that could alter my states, mainly because it's something that's so far in my rearview mirror, it's not of interest to me. But I wouldn't want to ever be in a place, given what the things that I've actually said, or that there are these arbitrary lines between drinking and drunkenness. I wouldn't want anybody to see me involved in it and then make the conclusion that I'm a hypocrite. So I just avoid it altogether. It doesn't change anything. And of course, it's not that I'm denying myself anything. If I really felt that it was something I could partake in, I would say so. And that I do, but I never get to the point of drunkenness. It's just why, for me, it's a door that I don't need to open. But other people, freedom to do what they want to do, just drunkenness is the issue. So we can see that here. Here's the point. Don't give yourself over to those things, lest they drink and forget the law. Now, first of all, this law is Torah. And so it is forgetting the finer points of it, which a king of Israel is supposed to be the person who leads the people in the righteousness of the law, in following God, because by this time, he has written his law. These are the things that are and are not acceptable, so you don't go outside of them. So, lest they drink and forget the law, and that they pervert justice for all the afflicted. So once again, you start to step outside of just what is moderation, if you will, and you come under the influence. It's going to affect your judgment. It's going to affect the way that you take care of people. It'll start to dull your awareness of your surroundings, and you'll start to be derelict in your duty as king. This is her caution. So I can definitely tell you this: there wasn't always a time in my life when I would, when I was away from that. I didn't get saved till I was 20 into 21. So for all of my high school years and all the rest of it, I just did what high school kids do, and drinking was just part of the thing. I could tell you this, that every time that we would drink, it would be to the point of excess, and I can definitely tell you that inhibitions go away the more that you've had to drink. So that was my own personal experience. Again, for me personally, I see no benefit to it. It's of no importance to me. I frankly don't like the taste anyhow. So with all that being said, we see this, instead of you partaking in it and having it cloud or impair you, here's what verse 6. So give the strong drink to him who is perishing, or who is coming to ruin, or has all kinds of whatever the trouble may be. It doesn't tell us. It's a very general term here. And wine to those who are bitter of heart. So people who are bogged down with this, that, and the other thing, let them have it, because it'll just help them forget where it is in their life and whatever is going on that's brought them to that point. Don't know that I necessarily agree with that, because it's like that problem's still going to be there in the morning, so you're just masking the problem. Let him drink and forget his poverty and remember his misery no more. So until morning, until it wears off. So the point is, if people are going to partake in those things, it shouldn't be you. It will impair you. If people want to impair themselves, the people who have a reason to try to escape it for any length of time, let them do it. But I definitely know people in my years, I know people who have done precisely that. They medicate themselves through drugs and alcohol only to find out that it's there when they come out of the ether. So better to just take care of the problem head on than to try to escape it, because it never goes away. Anyway, that's just, again, that's kind of implied here, and that's just kind of the application if we wanted to make it here. So instead, here's what she says. Open your mouth for those who can't, the speechless. Be their advocate, be their voice. So, and in the cause of those who are appointed to die, or that are going to be coming to that kind of ruin. It doesn't necessarily have to mean that these are people that are on death row, but these would basically be people that if you do not advocate for them, and the kind of the implication is that your advocacy will change the course of things. So the assumption by many is that there's something that is here that's being that they're being accused of that they're not necessarily guilty of, and their advocacy could turn that. So again, there's so much that's implied in this. If you're so busy in the pursuit of just your own merriment, you're not going to be the one who will speak for those who can't speak. And you won't be there to advocate for the person that, if you did advocate for them, could vindicate them in the most extreme kind of a situation. Then verse 9 says this, now open your mouth and judge righteously. So again, a king would be doing that. Make a righteous judgment, or in the adjudication of something. If you're of a right mind, you will, of course, be paying attention to the things of the law, which gives you the ability to judge, and you'll judge in a way that's acceptable and right as far as God is concerned. So, and then plead the cause of the poor and needy. That's in the very grandest way we can kind of summarize all this. So you as a king can take what a king has in his power and the charting, if you will, of the course of your life, and you can keep that between you and the Lord, or you can give it over to some woman who will lead it in the wrong place. Or you can choose to, satisfy yourself by your own desires and drunkenness and revelries and the all the stuff that comes along with it, and it can completely cloud your judgment, and the people who would need you the most to be their advocate will come to all kinds of harm because you're all in your own self, pursuits. This would be great advice, if you will, to anyone who would be king. And so if it's Solomon and this is Bathsheba, brilliant. We don't need to know who they are. It doesn't change a thing about what was said here. But again, this is just, you can see it play out in history of people who can pursue other things that they shouldn't, and it's going to lead to all kinds of consequence down the road. The more important that person is, and the more people who are dependent on them to discharge whatever function they're supposed to, a king, a father, a head of a company, whatever it may be, the more people that are under them and dependent on them to function properly, when they malfunction, it's not just them who are affected, but everybody down the line. So this would be great advice to give to a king, and it's really good advice to give to anyone. And so again, you have the option. You can do the things that are self-indulgent, and they will consume you because you're thinking of no one but yourself, or you can take into account any particular action is going to have a reaction. And so here with this woman that's being spoken of, really important that you realize that she would be the complete contrast to the person that's mentioned there at verse 3, of the woman who is not virtuous. And it is the same root word that's mentioned here. So this virtue is a strength. And it's an inner strength, and it's an outward strength. It works both ways. And you see that by the descriptions that are here. So the person that is shown in the unfavorable light is the person that is, don't give your strength to that person. Here is a person that's mentioned in verse 10 who already has that own strength of herself. So she would be your equal, basically, is the way that that's looking at. You're going to be the person in verse 3 who has all the strength, but you'll give it to someone else with very bad consequence. If you find someone who is like yourself, who has all these things herself, you're not going to be giving from deficit to her and letting her run everything. She's already got her act together, if you will. And so you don't find a whole lot of things about drinking from this point on. That was the first caution. Don't give yourself to a weak woman. Find a virtuous one. Don't pursue the things of the earth that will take away your advocacy for those who need you. and being so wrapped up in yourself that you don't see the needs of people. As a king, this would be a massively important thing. So you can look through the history of the kings from David onward, after the split between Jeroboam and Rehoboam, when there was an Israel and a Judah, and you can find the things that those guys did. Their immorality and their idolatry was always the biggest downfall. Ultimately, because they would reject the authority that God gave them in his written word, and they did not look to him as being that person that they should be consulting with, that they should serve. The good kings did, the bad kings did not, and it really is a very simple thing to track down. So this woman here is one who does concern her things with the matters of the law, and you can see that. So let's look through the things that are here characteristically. And again, if you were to look at this, and if you read Hebrew, you would find that in verse 10, beginning at verse 10, it's the first letter of the alphabet, of the Hebrew alphabet, and then like to us, it's ABC. Every sentence begins with that letter of the alphabet, and it goes sequentially one through the one to the end. So from 10 to 31, it would be, and if there were more letters of the alphabet, they would have expanded this, but this just covers their alphabet. So in verse 10, you get this. Who can find a virtuous wife, for her worth is far above rubies? Or just that there's no way for you to put an earthly value. Could have used gold, could have used silver, could have used whatever. Rubies are just very much a commodity that they would understand in those times. But this virtue is the same word, root word, that you get from the one that you're not supposed to give your, quote, strength. That strength that you should never give to someone else. Virtue here is a derivative of that same word. It's pretty much straight across. So there's a way for you to look at that and say, you shouldn't give your strength to someone else. Go find someone who has it themselves, and they're like you are, so that you're not operating from deficit. So who can find a virtuous woman? That's the idea, a virtuous wife. That would be, who can find, if you could, she is of value well beyond anything in the material sense, and she goes through to explain why. So I'll take the view, let's just, nobody has to agree with this, but let's just, for sake of what we're looking at here, let's assume that this is Solomon being referred to as Lemuel more because of his title than his proper name, and that this is Bathsheba who's saying this to him. Gives him that consult, if you will, of the first 9 verses about being careful for himself, and now go search out a wife. And so, if I'm going to be cynical, you could see Solomon at the end of his life between wives and concubines. Well, I had 1,000 of them, and somewhere in there, if I had a composite, maybe I had all of these things. I'm just being cynical. So, verse 11 says, now the heart of her husband safely trusts her, and she will have no lack of gain, so that he will have no lack of gain. So the point is, when the husband's doing the things that he does, he's not concerned about what's happening back at home, because he has absolute trust in her. And that trust, with all the things that are mentioned here, you can see it's basically, while I'm gone away, not only is she going to keep things in a static sense, things will not get worse, they will only get better, because everything that she does is excellent. So, of course, this would have to imply that they are of like mind in these things, and that in his absence, she carries on. And this would be the perfect kind of way of looking at what a marriage should be. The husband and the wife, all on the same page. His strength is her strength. They both have it anyway. They're of one mind, and in the absence, one or the other. Now, again, implication, that would mean that the husband's just like she is, and what he's doing, she would have trust in him as well. This would be totally reciprocal. It should be. So the king should be a trustworthy man. We read that from the first 9 verses. Be impeccable of character. Find a wife who is also impeccable of character, that when you're gone, she's seeing to everything in the household, and there is no difference between the two of you. When you're there at the end of the day, or whenever it is that you come back, everything is as you left it. If anything, it's in better shape, because she does everything that you would be doing if you were there. And it's always that idea of moving forward. So at verse 11, that's why he's able to trust her. This heart of the husband safely trusts her, and so he will have no lack of gain. Everything is going to move forward. It won't go in reverse. It's going to always be on the advance. She does him good and not evil all the days of her life. Now, as we read this, let's remember, in case I don't remember to do it, flip the script on this, because this should be the other way around. It should work in both directions. But remembering this is mom to son. In other times, it's been Solomon, father to son, or that he would refer to his sons, but sometimes he expands it beyond that and says princes, which could be his kids or others, but it's man to man. In this case, it's mother to son, and yet we would be able to say if she was talking to a daughter, she would be saying, look for a husband that's just like this. That when he's away, you're not worried about the things that he's doing, you're of like mind. And when he comes home, he's advancing the cause of you and the family. You're always in lockstep one with another. So she does him good and not evil all the days of her life. She seeks out wool and flax, which flax is just another way of saying linen. She seeks out these things and she willingly works with her hands. Well, you look for those things because you're going to do something with them. Now, we know that she's very commercial as far as the things she does. She's industrious. But this is rather, and you're going to see a couple of instances of this, she gains these things together because she's making things for her own family, her husband, her children. She's doing all of these things, so she seeks out that stuff because making their own clothes. So, she's not going out and buying it. It tells us here she's getting all the things for it. In some places, it says that she's even producing it. But here, she seeks it out. She seeks out wool and flax and willingly works with her hands. So takes the raw material and turns it into something that they could use. She is like the merchant's ships where she brings her food from afar. This is one of the few places where she's likened to something that's in the physical world. So the point is, if you don't have it right there in front of you, then you're going to go seek it out, and you won't just go to the first place you can find something. You're going to go as far as you have to go to get what is the best. So the idea of the merchant's ship, she's like that. She will travel to where she needs to travel to get what is best on behalf of her family. So again, let me reset here because it's very important and it's easy to get lost in this. It isn't as though you're going to find someone who is probably able to do all of these perfectly. So it's not as though don't settle, don't find somebody unless they meet all this criteria, because you will be frustrated. Husbands will not be able to find someone that they think fits this, and a woman will never ever look at herself in light of this and say, I do all of those to that extent. So there are times that this kind of thing can actually be seen. It's so idealistic that whenever there's even a little bit of fault, it's really focused on. So let's just say again, this is the ideal, that idea that we find all throughout the New Testament as well. We are supposed to be of impeccable character and conduct. When we fail, that doesn't mean that we fail across the board. If anything, what it should do is drive us to be in prayer and asking that God would make up the lack, why we would fail at these things. So a lady or even a man, as much as a man can have this applied to him, we would want to be able to say, if I don't meet that criteria and if I don't meet that standard, Lord, would you help me to meet it somehow, some way? Make it possible that that whatever it is that I might be deficient in, then I bring that deficiency to you and I ask that you would make up what I lack. That would be the way that we look at this. So rather than saying, oh, I'm a failure here, I'm a failure here, I'm a failure there, it's to say, but I want to get to the point where this could be said of me. So whatever is necessary, Lord, I come to you and ask that you would make it so. Now, so she is like the merchant's ships, and she brings her food from afar. She'll go to whatever place, whatever it is to secure that which would be the best. So it says in verse 15, she also rises while it is yet night and provides food for her household and a portion for her maidservants. So she's like the last one to go to bed, we're going to find out here in a bit, or she burns the midnight oil, as we like that phrase, but also she's the first person to get up. And notice that there are these people who are in her house who are also people that are servants to her, and she provides for them as well. So this is like going above and beyond. Now, there's all the jokes, and you'll find this sometimes with guys, and you know, we joke about this, where you find these guys that are mentioned by their wives, oh, my husband does this, he does that, and there's all these accolades and all these things that are said about him, and he's so cool, he's so wonderful, he does all this stuff, and then there's the rest of us who are going, dude, calm down, because you're making the rest of us look bad. This is kind of the same thing that ladies might look at this and say, if this lady existed, I would probably, tell her to go sit down and stop it, because you're making it impossible for the rest of us. That's the kind of joke that we can make from this. But at the end of it, What I'm hoping that we look at it is to say, this is someone above what people could say. The Lord would look at this person and say, precisely the kind of person that I would want to be a representative of me in the world. So that would be, and you're going to see that it closes that way. So as we go on, it tells us she rises early while it is still dark. It's not night. This is in the morning, but she's up before the sun, and she provides food for her household. That idea of, having everything ready when the rest wake up, even to the point where maidservants, the people who are there under her, and, there's different ways that maidservants could be looked at here, but whether this is referring to children or people who are servants in her house, whatever it may be, all of those who are under her roof, she's making provision for. Before they're awake, she's already at work. That's the point here, rather than getting into the nuances of, terms like maidservants and household and all that. Now, she considers a field and she buys it, and from her own profits, she plants a vineyard. So profits are the produce of what she has, made. So she'll go, in this case, let's just use hypothetical stuff. She sees a bit of property that might be good for raising crops or whatever else. So she sees it. It can be irrigated. It's good. It's not rocky. It's this, it's that. She sees it and says, perfect. So she makes an offer for it. She purchases it. And then because she's industrious and has resource, she uses that resource to increase it more. She sees the property, buys it, invests the time, and makes it where it becomes profitable, and it just expands. It keeps producing more and more. All of her decisions are leading in that direction. So she girds herself with strength and strengthens her arms. And the girding, usually, this seems more like a male thing, where you would gird yourself, and that's just you take all the loose clothing, you gather it up, and it's usually meant in the sense of war. But it's also meant in the way of preparation. She realizes what it is that she is supposed to do, and that there are physical demands and all the rest, if that's what, kind of, again, we're speaking idealistically. But if she has a task, she prepares herself for the task. So the girding up means preparation. You don't have loose ends. You tie those all up, and you're able to do the things that you're supposed to do. And so everything is kind of tied together and ready and prepared. She strengthens her arms. Verse 18. She perceives that her merchandise is good, and her lamp does not go out by night. So there's always, again, this goes to the idea of preparation. But she knows that what she has produced is of really great quality, and she has complete confidence in what it is that she's produced, and that it would be useful for anyone who would want to make purchase of it. And again, she's made all kinds of preparation. Her lamp doesn't go out at night. A couple of ways to look at this, that she's never caught off guard like, uh-oh, I didn't put oil in my lamp. I'm not prepared for this. Interesting that this has a little bit of a parallel to Jesus and the 12 virgins, or 10 rather, virgins, that some of them, the oil in their lamp went out. They didn't have any. They weren't prepared. In this case, same kind of thing. Her lamp doesn't go out by night. She's made preparation for those things. She has total confidence in what she produces and the quality of it. So, goes on, and it says in verse 19, she stretches out her hands to the distaff, and her hand holds the spindle. These are things that you'd be making you've already bought your wool and your linen. These are the things that you would use to make them into something else. The raw materials made into useful things for making garments or tapestries or whatever else the case may be. So she has a lot of skills that are here. That, as you look through this, she's not only smart, she's not only industrious, she's not only ambitious and capable physically, but she also has a bunch of things that we would consider as trades. She's able to do so many things that normal people necessarily might not be able to do all of these things. So this is the composite perfect person that is here. Again, should we aspire to this? Ladies, absolutely. Guys, whatever the equivalent is on the guys' side of it, should we aspire to such things? Without question. Without question. Why? A person like this is completely useful to the Lord, absolutely. Is a great reflection on the church in modern times, would have been a great reflection on a person under the law at the time, because these are things that God would bless. And the idea of blessing and that it's visible to everyone is a great indication that this person is walking rightly before the Lord. Now, you could have awful people have lots of material good, but people aren't going to speak well of them. And they will realize that a lot of that stuff is gotten because they have defrauded or taken by force from someone else. Everything that she has, she's labored for those things because she's really good at what she does. So men, women, same kind of thing. Ideals are very, very good. Have a goal and look to attain it. Ask that the Lord would give you the assistance to show you if it's useful and worthwhile. And once you start that pursuit, that he would make it successful. So she extends her hands to the poor. Yes, she reaches out her hands to the needy. So she sees that what she has is a blessing and that God has ultimately given it to her. She then has compassion on people who don't have what she has and doesn't withhold it from them. But as the law would ask, the needy and the poor are to be seen to by the people that are part of the people of Israel. So again, remember, and it could extend beyond the people of Israel, because if it was in a modern sense, it's not just, well, we're only supposed to give to the people in the church. If God shows you that there's a really genuine need, even from the outside of people who don't believe as you do, but God wants to use you as a vessel that might win them by seeing your care and your concern for them and your compassion and helping to meet their needs, does that really move on their hearts to want to know more about who we are? Absolutely. But remember, it was under the law, the people who were the children of Israel, they would see the needs of the poor, and God said, you take care of them because they're of your brothers and sisters. So you take care of their needs. So would it extend outside of that? Absolutely. But the giving of alms was expected, and it would be something that they would do at the temple. Well, the temple was dominated by people who were, and they were there for that reason. The temple was for the Jewish people. It was the place of their corporate worship as a nation. So, but you can see here too, the idea of compassion is ultimately that, and it's not just because it was an obligation. This gives by implication, yeah, it's in the law, but this is really something that's of her heart anyway. So the idea of, yeah, we're supposed to do something. There is if you want to call it an obligation, but if your heart's in the right place, you don't see it as an obligation or a duty. It's just, this is right. I'm accepting that I should do this, but God's been gracious to me, so why would I not? So, goes on in verse, she is not afraid, verse 21, she is not afraid of snow for her household, for all her household is clothed with scarlet. And so again, when intemperate weather comes, she's not like afraid. And the idea of scarlet, there's reasons why they think that this is really kind of the way of, it's more looking at the color, but the color would be something here would give the impression that it's of not only the type of a quality, but if it's of the kind of construction that it would not be a problem wearing it. If it's cold outside, it's going to keep you warm. So the scarlet becomes almost too much of the focus, rather than she's not afraid of snow because she's made something that will withstand the cold. That's more what's being looked at here. She makes tapestry for herself, and her clothing is fine linen and purple. So again, the idea that she has sought the stuff out, but that she has the ability to make it. And tapestries are not the things necessarily that you wear, but it's even the adorning of the house. So she makes her own tapestries, and she makes everything, and it's fine, and it's a reflection that it's not, well, it's good enough. Everything about her is excellent. And so even the furnishings of her house that she has made is excellent of quality. So verse 23, her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. And sitting among the elders means he's one of them. So again, is this one particular person? Does she actually exist? And does he actually exist? Or is it, no, it would give the impression it's not that, because Solomon, or whoever you king, when you're looking for a wife, here's the one that you ought to look for. So this is in the hypothetical. So a person like this would have raised to the point of prominence, and when her husband sits among the elders in the gate where the judicial things took place, it's where all the business, if you will, of the city would take place. He's known by reputation because he's married to that woman who is just like he is, that's industrious and good judgment and useful, right? So verse 24, she makes linen garments and sells them, and she supplies sashes for the merchants. What an interesting thing, because it's not only that she is really good at what she does, she makes fine linen garments, but also these sashes, whatever they're made of, are so good that even when the merchants come to town selling all of their things, they'll seek her out because what she produces is superior, and they seek her out. So the people coming through town for commerce know that she makes stuff of such great quality, they seek her out. Pretty cool. And then it says, strength and honor are her clothing. And she will rejoice in in times to come. It means just basically she doesn't worry about tomorrow because everything's been made preparation for. She sees that God is blessed, and you'll see that she has a dependence on him anyway, but she's not worried about tomorrow because tomorrow is already seen to. She's made plans. She's made preparation for that. Strength and honor are her clothing. If you want to see her, strength and honor, those are the things that if you could wear strength and honor as clothing, she would be clothed with it. So it's using the imagery of that, not that you can't clothe yourself with those things, but it's as though she's adorned with them. We know her by strength and honor. It says, now she opens her mouth with wisdom, of course, and on her tongue is the law of kindness. So everything that she says is governed by love or kindness. She just is known by that. There's a governing of her actions and her words. And when you peel back all of it and pay attention to everything that's been said, you would look at it and said, it's all conditioned on love. That's the law. It's what governs her. Pretty amazing. So verse 27, she watches over the ways of her household, means that she's mindful, she's vigilant, she's careful, she watches over those things. And it says, and she does not eat the bread of idleness. Well, obviously, because she couldn't be all of these things if she just, okay, I've done enough, and she just kind of coasts. This is a person who is always doing something. She's always on the move. So pretty obvious that this would lead to these conclusions, which is in verse 28. It says, now her children, they rise up and they call her blessed. Now, blessed just means that she's happy, she's content. There's a real peace, there's an enjoyment, there's a joyfulness in her. And not only is it in her, but it's also her kids recognize that in her. They're the beneficiaries of it. You would assume that she's in the exact same place that they would be as well. And her husband also praises her. He says lots of things about her. Now, that sets verse 29, 30, and 31. Are they all basically the praises of the husband? Or is the praise of the husband only in verse 29, and then the person who wrote this down is speaking about her, verse 30 and 31? If it's Bathsheba writing to Solomon, she would be able to say in conclusion verses 30 and 31, or it could be that as the husband praises her, the children speak of her as being blessed, and they're blessed because of her. The husband lavishes praise on her. So the question is very simply this. Is the husband's words reflected in only verse 29, or is it 29 through 31? Or is it just in 29 and 30 and 31 as commentary? It doesn't change a thing. It's still speaking about her. So what it says in verse 28, her husband also praises her. So what does he end up saying? At least this: many daughters have done well. So among women, many have done much of the exact same things. However, you, if this woman exists and her husband exists, this is what he would say of her. So he would say, you excel, or you exceed them all. There may be plenty of great examples, but when compared to you, you're above all of them. You excel in all of these things far more than anyone else. So then verse 30 is, if it's still the husband speaking, great. If it is a commentary, which I tend to favor, whoever it was that wrote this, this would be the summary. After what the husband would say and what the children would say of her, then here is what could be said of her by the person speaking of her. Again, she's the ideal. She's the composite. It's not like this person is somebody that we're being described, and here's her name in case there was any mystery here. This is who I'm talking about. It's not that kind of a situation. This is the ideal person in her position. So verse 30 says, now charm is deceitful and beauty is passing. Now these are outward things. So a person could present as she does here. You would look at this person and she would be physically very impressive because of the things that she makes, because of, she, in the physical sense, she's very active at things. So she's going to present outwardly all of these things, and yet they're still temporary. Eventually, all of these things would ultimately break down. If this person, let's just, for lack of trying to understand it, let's say that this is speaking about a young lady in her 20s, let's say. Doing the things that she does would be much tougher for someone in their 70s. So all of the vigor of life and all of the strength and all those things, they're there for a time, but they're not always going to be there. But they're the ones that present outwardly. But notice, but a woman who fears the Lord will be praised. That's inward. That would never diminish. That would never change. So even if at some point the physical things no longer function quite the same way as the body begins to break down, in fact, you could say that the inner person over a lifetime, if they're really plugged into the Lord, is going to get better with time. And yet the physical can really kind of diminish over time. So as far as this is concerned, charm is deceitful, beauty is passing, and charm could mean a number of different things. But on the outward side, the things that people would be drawn to, the things of personality, and then of course beauty, the things that would be outward that people would really be drawn to are one thing, but the inward things, and that being things of the Lord, well, then the person who fears the Lord above all things will be praised. Now, or it means that people will have accolades, things to say of them. That would be expected, and ultimately that person would end up saying, well, the Lord is the one who did it anyway. But people will take a recognition of it, because God will be so pleased with the inward person that the outward person is going to show, even if at some point down the road the physical representation has diminished over time, but the purity of the person on the inside doesn't change at all, and people see it. And then it says, this is again, the person who doesn't give, like the husband, don't give your power and your strength to someone else. She is the complete opposite of this. When you saw the caution given by the mother in verse 3, this person, as we summarize her, is the complete opposite of that. So then in verse 31, now give her the fruit of her hands, or let her enjoy the fruit of her hands, the produce, what has come of her life. Let her enjoy those things. And it says, and let her own works praise her in the gates. When people examine the totality of her life, let the people, when they speak about her in the open places, look at her as the ideal. And that's what's being considered here. So Proverbs, it's a fitting end. It's really, really cool. And ladies, when you read that, the one thing you never want to take away from something, and remember, if we're ever reading something in the Bible and we walk away from it and we just go, I feel so inferior, I feel so wrong, I feel so this, I feel so that, because I've looked at this and what's the ideal person and I just don't measure up. Well, let's remember that in all of these attributes, this is really somebody that you would want to seek out. Are they going to be perfect in all of those things? Well, of course not. But when you have a list like this, and there are plenty that exist for men and women all throughout the scripture, when you start to look at people of impeccable character, Paul wrote to both Timothy and Titus of the leadership in the churches that God had put them in charge of and that Paul had sent them to. They were to look for men who were like them, who had a lot of these attributes, that they were supposed to be these impeccable men of great, great character. Acts chapter 6. When they were looking for men who were supposed to just what we think of as waiting tables. Remember, we get that. There was a dispute that came up. The Greek people who had come into the church, the Gentiles that had come into the church, felt that the people that were there at the early part of the church were neglecting the needs of their elder and their women, their widows. And so they bring it to the apostles and they say, what are you guys going to do about this? Our people are being neglected, but we're all part of the church. And so what they're told, and this is just like the day-to-day of things, and the waiting on of tables is one of the things that are mentioned. It's just the day-to-day existence of the church. They say to those guys, well, we've got our own obligations here, the elders, the apostles. We've got our own thing. So here's what we'll do. Let us empower you to go out and find people who are just like you. So among your people, among the Gentiles, find people who are able to do what you're asking us, but make sure that they have a few things. First of all, that they are men who are filled with the Holy Spirit, men who are filled with wisdom, and they have a great report. Everybody looks at them and says, if that's a person that's been left in charge, I know who they are, I'm good with it. So finding people like that may sound easy, but it's not. And so think again, this is not saying we need to find leaders of the church, people who can start a brand new church. These are the people that are going to see to the day-to-day needs of other people, and they were to be of absolutely impeccable character. So wherever we might find that we somehow fail, that's okay. Failure is okay. It's when you're exposed to it and told and shown that there's a failure, what do you do in that point? It's like, I don't want that to go on. Lord, help me not to fail in that again, because I want it to speak of who you are. I want my life to be a witness. So really, really cool stuff. Now, I had mentioned before we started here something that I want to look at. And this is one of those things where how we discuss matters that are going on around us, I think sometimes is incredibly important. How is it that we speak to people within the church, and especially when we're talking with people outside the church? I am a person who absolutely 100% thinks that the days in which we live is getting very, very close to the return of the Lord. Like the stuff that we're studying in the book of Revelation. I believe that we are at that point in history, and I've believed that since I've been since I first came into faith in Jesus almost 40 years ago. I've really felt that we're in that place. And so at the time, I wouldn't have known how to describe it. I wouldn't have known, other than the little bits that I had heard in Bible studies about it, but I wasn't conversant in the topic. So fast forward years later, you start to know how to travel in the language and the way that it's explained. And so when somebody comes to me and says, well, what's your eschatology? Well, I can pretty much tell them what my eschatology is. And so my eschatology is based on the things that I see in the scripture talking about the end of days. I'm going to explain where that comes from, if it's a term that you're not familiar with. But they might say, well, the end of days is upon us, or the end times, the last days, whatever those kind of things may be. I'm not thrown by that kind of language because I'm familiar with it, but that doesn't mean that everyone is. When I was a brand new believer, if somebody said, well, what's your eschatology? What are your thoughts on the end of days and all that stuff? It's like, I think that Jesus is coming soon, but much more than that, I probably didn't have a whole lot. I couldn't have gone chapter and verse and spoken about it. I couldn't look at things around the world. I couldn't have that, excuse me, I couldn't have that discussion because it was just something with which I wasn't completely and entirely familiar. Well, that's changed a bit, but boy, if you go up to a person on the street and you ask them a question like, what are your thoughts on Jesus and the return, his return? What are your thoughts on the end of days? What is your eschatology? If you ask them questions like that, the image that they're going to give you is that one of like the person ringing the bell, wearing the sandwich board, saying that Jesus is coming, and it's all that gloom and doom kind of stuff. We're used to that image. What we want to be instead is able to say, I can take what the Bible says about that topic and I can explain a little bit about it and explain it in terms that they can probably understand. So I want to kind of more, as much as I possibly can, I really want to look for a way to have that discussion with someone else. So first of all, where does that term come from? And I've covered this a little bit before, but no, here's what Paul says, and this is found in the book of 2 Timothy chapter 3. And Paul is talking to Timothy about a time that is future to their time, and I believe Paul really believed it would happen during his lifetime, if not even sometime during Timothy's. Because again, this is Timothy, 2 Timothy, and it really is at the end of Paul's life. So his is more preparation for Timothy, that Paul at the end of his life, it hasn't kind of gone exactly like expected, but may very well happen during Timothy's lifetime. So he's able to say to him, know this, that in the last days perilous times will come. So there's two things, last days and perilous times. They're separate things. So when he says the last days, that last, the word in Greek, last, is eschatos. So eschatos just means in the line of things, it's the last. So in this case, the eschatos of days. As we get to that time, at the end of days, during that time, there will be something that's characteristically even more aggressive, and it's perilous times. It means vicious. It means that there's desperate times. And he goes through and gives a whole litany of things that are characteristic of that. And remember, he's writing this to the church, and he's saying, Timothy, be careful, because as we approach the time, the end of days, inside of that time, you're going to find perilous times, because inside the church, you're going to have people that will present themselves to be part of it, and yet here are their characteristics. And he gives that. But remember, because he says, first of all, they're lovers of self, and he closes this whole litany of things by saying they're not lovers of God, they're lovers of pleasure. So all those things in between are more symptoms. And he says, these are people who have a form of godliness, but they deny the power thereof. Now, if we're talking to a new believer, or somebody who maybe as a Christian identifies as a Christian, but they're not really conversant in this. What we don't want to go to is say, what are your views of the end of days and what's your eschatology? We want to be able to have that discussion with them more along the lines of, look, God told us that things will not always remain the same. There will be a time when the Lord returns, and he's going to come to an earth that's going to look really, really different than what it was when Jesus was walking among us. So there will be a number of different things. And we want to be able to point it out in the biggest of the big pictures. There will be all kinds of compromise that takes place in the church. We're going to notice that the world is going to be much more accepting of the idea of a much smaller group of people having a lot more power. And they'll be willing to do that. So you're going to find a whole bunch of different things. I believe that the technology that we're watching around us really helps to understand how could all of that take place, because 50 years ago, the idea of a very small group of people being able to run the world, if you will, seemed like a really difficult thing. How are they going to pull that off? Now we look at it and say, technologically, it's a pretty simple thing. So we can talk about all those kind of things to the younger believers in the church and say, when we read things like what Paul says here, in the last days, perilous times are going to come. A new believer is going to go, I don't really fully understand that. Well, let me explain. And so we want to be able to say, what he means by the last days is that sooner or later, the Lord is going to come back, and everything as we know it does come to an end. That's what the book of Revelation is about. So the idea that all of the temporary corruption and all the stuff that we see around the world that really drives us nuts and maybe even causes fearfulness is only for a time. So the time's going to come when the Lord is going to put things back together the way that they were supposed to be. This works great for the unbelieving world as well, because it can get us to that point where we say at the end of it, because all that's true, that's what the Bible teaches. And if you believe, and if I can get you to the point where you would believe that that's possible, the signs are all around us. But the big important part is not to be so familiar with the signs, but really what should we take away from that? And what we should take away from that is that the Lord loves you and desires that you would come to know him. And he's given you all of these warnings so that you'll have an awareness of the times in which you live. But for myself, like when we read of the Proverbs woman, she's not worried about tomorrow. I too, same thing. Tomorrow could affect me here and now, but I've done everything that I can to try to be in preparation for it. But ultimately, my existence is not dependent on how well this world functions. My concern is what's happening down the road when I come before the Lord face to face. I'm not afraid of that. I'm prepared for it. I look for that. That's when corruption's gone. That's when all of these things are finally done away with. And all the things that cause us grief and pain and sorrow in this world, they're only for a time. So when we talk with people, once again, young in the church, don't be troubled by the things that you see around you. The Bible's already told us that these things would take place. And God has told us that he's going to keep us from those things. And will we have trouble in this life? Yeah, very possible. We never know what's going to be tomorrow. Things can change on a dime. But more importantly for us, when it comes to the matters of faith and eternity, those things are not in question. Those things are simple. They're laid out for us. We already know where that's going. To the world, when we talk about these things, have you noticed, if they're not believers, have you noticed things in the world? Stuff just seems really super unsettled. And nobody really knows what's going to happen tomorrow. There's more uncertainty than we've ever seen before, and people are much more on edge than they've ever been before. I love to say that to an unbelieving person because they see it as well. It's palpable. You watch it around the world. Everybody's on edge. And then we want to be able to share with them and say, but personally, I'm not on edge with those things because the Bible tells me that's what I should expect before the Lord's return. And then I want to be able to tell them about the hopefulness that I have in my own life. Now, again, at the time of the church, there was incredible persecution. The Romans were horrible people. And by the close of the first century, and even through the middle part of the century, martyrdom was like normal. And the apostles all died horrible deaths. You can go look at that. So it's not as though everything was rosy then and it's only now getting bad. It's been bad all throughout. The person that's going to really, really live for the Lord may very well struggle, and it may be very difficult for them. If you live here in the West, in our days, we've been very much blessed, but it doesn't mean that it's that way everywhere at all times. So what we want to be able to say to anybody in the world is to say, we see the same things that you see all the time, but we're not troubled in it for the same reasons that you are, because we see it as a temporary thing. And the Lord has told us a whole lot about those days. He's also told us what can give us a confidence in these days and a real sobriety of mind that keeps us from losing it when we see things happening around us. We're not troubled like the rest of the world is. The Bible talks about that a lot, and how we're to conduct ourselves when we're watching the world melting down around us. There is to be a real level playing field in our minds of just saying, I'm not troubled by those things because I already know that these things were taking place. God's in control, not me. I'm not troubled by these things because God has already got them in his control, and he's already told me what it is that I am to expect. I can be taken by surprise every single day of the things that are happening right there around me at any one time, but in the eternal sense, that's all settled. I know where we will be eventually. Between here and there, can any number of things happen. To the world, they're completely out of control of any of those things, and there's no hope down the road. For us, that hope down the road is the thing that keeps us settled as we await all those things happening right now to run their course, and then we see him face to face. So, brothers, sisters, if you're reading, or if you're listening to this rather, let's be careful how it is that we interact with the world around us and the words that we use. We don't want to talk over people's heads. We want to try to make it as understandable to them as we possibly can, even though what we're talking about, as far as the Bible is concerned, was to us at one time. It's like, I have no clue what that is. God's opened our eyes to it. And it's best for us to try to explain these things the way that we understand them, realizing that most people are just normal human beings, and we can speak like normal human beings about amazing things that God has done and what he has shown us, but we want to make sure that we're able to describe them in such a way that makes it something that really draws people in to want to be a part of it and to have some peace of mind in a very, very troubled world. So just wanted to address that. It's very, very important that we don't come off to the world any more than they're going to want to see us as these wild-eyed people who just are completely detached from reality, which we're not, but that's the persona that's a lot of times out there in the world because the devil would have us to look like completely unbalanced human beings. We want to avoid that, and one of the best ways to just to be able to talk to somebody like they're a normal human being just like you are. Speaking about amazing, grand things that are well beyond us. So just, I think, a timely thing that we ought to be paying attention to within the church, within people who may not be as completely up to speed on these things, certainly as far as the world is concerned, not giving them reason to look at us and the things that we say and write us off as completely detached from reality. So we will pick up at Ecclesiastes next week. If you have any questions on any of what I've shared or the trip to Israel, any of those kind of things, contact me through the ministry's website, which is oldpaththeology.net. And we are also in the book of Revelation on Thursdays. Love to have you join us for that. As we start to close through that, we're at the beginning of chapter 21, and then we'll be moving back onto the gospel, starting the New Testament all over again. Once again, hope that you can join us for those studies.